Hi there. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the way that I often think about harmony and voicings and stuff. So one of the things I dislike about jazz harmony and how it's generally taught is everything starts with sort of chord symbols and we build up from there. And I think this is kind of a not such a helpful way to go about it from the point of view of understanding how chords are related. So for instance, there's a lot of chords that have basically the same notes but different bass notes, so they become like labeled as being different chords, or you get like tritone substitutions in the major key. So for instance, if I swap out a G7 in the key of C for a D flat 7, suddenly all the extensions become like funny sharps and flats and things, and it's actually a lot harder to understand harmony that way. So one of the big principles I found generally in sort of standards and songs, and this isn't just a jazz thing, by the way, this extends to things like Beatles songs and that kind of stuff, even some, stuff from the 90s, songwriting with chord changes in general. But what I find is that actually one of the big principles you're going to find is that melody will tend to be diatonic on the whole, right? Like major, minor, maybe there'll be a few chromatic notes maybe borrowed from the minor key and the major key and so on, or maybe it will change key at some point. But on the whole, most of the melody notes will be diatonic to this or that key. And this is certainly true of most of the standards jazz repertoire. Even, I'd argue, a lot of the bop stuff, okay? Like, for instance, if we look at the Head to Anthropology, it's very much in B flat. Most of the notes are in B flat. Sort of bearing that in mind, I've sort of come up with an idea that, and this has happened quite naturally really from the way I organise things, but I'm really looking out for notes that are a little bit sensitive. Most of them are chromatic notes, but the first note that I'd really sort of pay attention to is like the F. So if a chord has an F in, it kind of wants to go back to 1. I mean, I'm talking about the key of C major here, right? So 4, F in this key, kind of has a certain sensitivity to it, right? I mean, for instance, if I play a melodic phrase, I can't end on that F. I have to do something afterwards to turn it, take it back to what you might think of as the kind of home realm of the key, which conventionally gets labelled the tonic, but I find like those expressions not so useful. I think there's really only two realms within the basic diatonic major scale. There's the sort of home tonic-y sort of realm, and then there's the kind of subdominant stroke dominant chords. And the main difference is that the subdominant chords aren't dissonant, so D minor, F major, and the the dominant, what we think of as usually as a dominant chord, such as G7, aren't. But then you've got things like B minor 7 flat 5. That's dissonant, but that's kind of in the middle, because in the minor key it functions as a subdominant chord. So I find it much easier just to not bother about making that distinction and just lump everything in together. And actually, if you spend any time listening to people like Wes Montgomery, for instance, you'll find that they very often play a subdominant sound, a F major or a D minor, say, over a G7. And actually, this has always been commonplace within jazz practice. Okay. So that's the first note I'm listening out for. And then the second note is probably the most common chromatic note that you're going to find in jazz, which is the flat 6. So, and this is obviously part of the Barry Harris major 6th diminished scale, if you know that. Also, people talk about the harmonic major scale, which is a major scale with a 6th flattened. And the effect this has is rather... So, for instance, in normal major key, we have those 3 chords, where it's like first few chords of Nightingale sang on Berkeley Square, by the way. But that's sort of the sort of tonic home function, and then all the chords with the F in, so D minor 7, F major 7th, G7, and then B minor 7 flat 5 are kind of the away chords, right? So that's the first distinction I'm listening for, and it's usually fairly obvious. So if you're transcribing a standard to something, you might wonder whether that song starts on a home settled chord, like, for instance, a tune like Rhythm Changers or Misty or something, or whether it starts on a slightly unsettled, but still pleasant sounding subdominant chord, so a tune like Honeysuckle Rose or Tangerine, or maybe almost like Being in Love, which starts on the 4 chord. Those are the two start on the 2 chord, but it has a slightly more unsettled chord. So that's the first thing I'm listening out for. And you can play any, like over those chords, really any diatonic option works great. You have to be a little bit more careful on the 1 chord, but over the subdominant chord it sounds great, for instance, to play chord 1, like that. Or it sounds great to play like 4, 2, obviously, 3 in this key, like in C major, E minor, or in F major, for instance, it would be D minor. And any of these chords from the diatonic key will sound great. Whereas if you're playing a tonic chord, you have to be a little bit careful about that 4, because it has that resolving quality, right? So that's the basic distinction I'm making within the diatonic key. But then you have like 5 chromatic notes that don't relate to that key. So in a sense, if I'm thinking of 4 and then all the chromatics as being one side of it, then I've got the diatonic side is the other side. So for instance, in the key of C, I'm thinking about C, D, E, G, A, B as being the play nice notes, and then all the other notes like F, if we go around a cycle, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, and then G flat as being standing outy or requiring resolution. And that's a very basic, simple model. It goes around a cycle of fifths actually. Divide it in 2, and you've got that basic kind of structure to it. The most chromatic note you're going to come across is an A flat. And this is where I find it useful, because just as I've done that, I can group all of those chords with the flat 6 together. And there's ones that just have the flat 6, such as, A flat major sharp 5. But most of the ones that you're going to hear most often used are actually subdominant or dominant function chords that also have an A flat in. So for instance, G13 flat 9, that's a nice one. And you could just play the boring G flat 9, G7 flat 9, but why would you bother doing that when you could do this? Lovely. And you've got the version with the A flat and the bass, which is also pretty awesome. And then you've got things like, the half diminished chord. Okay. Various inversions of that, which include F minor 6th. But you've also got F minor major 7th as well, which is a lovely chord. The famous John Barry James Bond chord. And so on, right? And actually, speaking of John Barry, he really used the sound a lot. You can, if I start making up melodies that use the flat 6. You get that James Bond world right away, don't you? And it's a really common sound in 90s pop. So you hear like loads of stuff, Radiohead, for instance, use the flat 6 all the time. It's such a common sound. Check it out. In general, there's a value in having that. I mean, that sounds more dissonant than this, or let alone this. But I can group those chords together, even diminished there, right, as being basically of the same kind of world. And that's useful to me. So when I'm sort of constructing, voice leading, for instance, if I'm playing like that kind of thing, it's useful to know that that's similar to that, right? For instance, or this. They're all kind of coming from the same world as the flat 6 world. Now, that is also part of the Barry Harris major 6 diminished scale as well. Now, when it's used as a flat 6, it tends to be descending, so it tends to be going like A flat G in the key of C, for instance, So, sorry, let's try that. For instance, right? If it's going the other way, then it becomes a sharp 5th. And so something quite interesting happens, because that is a gateway into the relative minor. So if we're in a key of C, for instance, that relative minor really takes us into the realm and of the... You can also have, of course, augmented sounds going on. Again, this all sounds a bit James Bondy, right? But the most common use of that is to go into the relative minor, which in this case is A minor to C major. We can be using exactly the same shapes, or we can be doing something like, for instance, or and that's a nice one, isn't it? Or we could be using a diminished chord. I keep diatonic, so I keep playing the A minor 6th, but actually I'll just use this. So hopefully you can hear that note looks both ways, and that's why it's such a useful note, and probably why Barry Harris included it in the major 6 diminished scale. It has a lot of different things it can do. It can take you into kind of this lovely sort of lush flat sixy realm, or it can take you into the relative minor. So that's something I'm going to look out for. Now the other one that we can talk about quickly is the flat 7. And the flat 7 takes us into the 4 realm. Okay, so I'm just going to take the first few chords really of There Will Never Be Another You. And this is interesting because we can map the whole thing with a little chromatic line going up from B flat. So start on the 5th. But we can come down again, down to the 6th, flat 6th, and then and then we get sharp 4, right? So we get this little chromatic line: B flat, B, C, D flat, then C again. And then C flat would be, which is the 3rd of our 4 minor. Let's put it in C major so you can see it perhaps a little bit clearer. Okay, and then we do that. So that sharp 4 gives us the 2/7, so in the key of E flat, that's F7, right? So in that way, we can actually play the whole first progression of There Will Never Be Another You, just using that chromatic line. So. Again. Now hopefully you can appreciate how useful that is for motivic playing. So I'm just kind of able to really get all of the harmony, I'll just try singing that line. Yeah? And again, this is interesting because you don't always get these details in the melodies. So the melody of There Will Never Be Another You is basically diatonic, right? Quite pentatonic influenced. So this is almost like a secondary melody or some voicing you might hear in the chords. You don't really hear that in the bass so much. The bass is kind of boom, 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 boom. That's right, boom. That's boom, 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 boom. It's very kind of, at least the version I know, it jumps around a bit. So you're going to hear those sort of, that chromatic line. If I just put it with the bass notes. Sounds great, right? And then this, right? Or give me this. Yeah, and if you're thinking that sounds a little bit like sort of stuff that the Beatles would do, you'd be absolutely on it, because things like Blackbird, for instance, are full of this, right? Now that suggests this chord progression, right? So in the key of G, it'd be 4, 4 minor, and then probably 1 in inversion, first inversion. And then again we've got that sharp 4, so we're going to 2/7. And then here we have a sus chord instead of the normal dominant, and then 1. Okay? So this stuff isn't unique to jazz. It's great to listen out for that. So those are, sharp 5 stroke flat 6, flat 7. What other notes have we got? Well, if we're playing, a little turn back, it's very common to hear the sharp 1, which makes us gives us a 6/7. So in key of F major, it would be C sharp and an A7. So. So I'm using a flat 6 on the 5, and I'm using a, the C sharp or the sharp 1 on the 6th chord there, right? And if you combine it, like Django often played it just on its own, but if you combine it with a flat, obviously it depends on the melody, but if you combine it with a flat 7 as well, B flat in this key, you get instant bebop. Do the same thing here, but that isn't the chromatic note. but that is. Okay, and you get that bebop lick, right? It's a way to build like two diminished chords. And you can hear that line. Yeah? So again, listen out for this stuff. This is all in, like if you listen to a Charlie Parker line, you hear that line implied and it might be very broken up. That can help you transcribe what they're playing as well, or whatever the soloist is. Okay? And that's out of our chromatic notes. We've got flat 6, flat 7, we got our sharp 4, and we got our sharp 1. And that kind of covers it. What one have we got left? Can't remember now. Oh, flat 3. Okay, yeah, flat 3. Well, that's the blues sound, right? So if you look at a tune like Confirmation, which is very similar to There Will Never Be Another You, but up a tone in the key of F. So we're going to do that again. And then get that chord, but that chord has a flat 7 in, right? The 4 chord, which is the flat 3 of the key. And then... Yeah, again, flat 6s, they're great. So things like... like Charlie Parker played them so much. Like the flat 6 is probably the most common one. That one. That one, for instance, or yeah, the flat 6s are just all over it, right? So listen out for those. But yeah, I was talking about the flat 3 there, which is of course obviously the blues, and we combine it with the sharp 4. You're going to get some of that sharp 4 diminished sound. It also works great over the 4/7. Charlie Parker used it all the time. So I'm just going to do a little cheat sheet at the end of this, but that's basically the way I view it. And again, to sort of talk about the way I can actually organise harmony based on that. So I'm not always chasing the root note. If I hear like or something like that, and then in Confirmation is that, and then I can kind of because I know that's going to be like related to B flat major, and I know that's going to be I can start to actually put together chord progressions that aren't just chasing the root around and actually have a lot more voice leading to them. So for instance, if I really wanted to lead that progression from Confirmation, I could go that, and then maybe this would be too much of a that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, and then again, like, and then, yeah, see what I mean? So hopefully you do, by taking account of those chromatic notes, I can really sort of drive the harmony without necessarily always having to follow the chord symbols around. I'm going to do a little cheat sheet at the end of this video, just so you've got the basic options, the most common ones that come up in tunes, for you to peruse, and let me know what you think. Hopefully you find it helpful. Thanks for watching.